Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about tracts of the spinal cord. So let's not waste any of your time, let's get right to it. Now, when we're talking tracts of the spinal cord, first thing we want to do is identify what we're talking about. What we're talking about is there are areas of the spinal cord on both the right and left side that are designed to carry information up to the brain, information down from the brain. And these are called tracts. And the tracts are specific to whatever, or I should say, where the message is coming from, what type of message. So, for example, what I mean by that is that, say that the skin on your arm is itching. Okay, there's a particular tract that will come from the arm, and then there's also within that arm, there's also a specific tract for that type of information. And there's even tracts that are designed more for frequent, important information, and tracts that are less important information. So it's one of the ways that the system is set up that the brain can understand the importance. If it gets a important, there's a track for important frequent information and so on and so forth. But it's a pretty complex series, and we're going to talk about those tracks. So obviously we've talked about the spinal cord and the white matter being the elevator system going up and down the spinal cord, and then the gray matter is what receives the information from the receptors and then sends it back out to the receptors. So those tracks are going to be in the white matter. Obviously, if it's an ascending track, it's going up, and descending track, it's going down. Looking at the diagram beside me, kind of diagonal, the red is designated as the ascending. They're not really red in the spinal cord, but the areas that you'll find them are highlighted in red, and the descending are green. So you'll notice that not only are they on opposite sides, but they're essentially somewhat, for the most part, on opposite ends or edges of the white matter. Now, when we're talking ascending tracks, we'll eventually get to the names. The beauty of the descending tracks, they all have the same suffix for the most part, so they're easy to spot. If you were just given a list of tracks, you could circle the descending tracks based on the suffix. The ascending tracks don't have that, and you'll see once we start talking about the names. But the importance, there's lots of information here, and want to be sure to capture all of it. But the important aspect is to recognize the pathway. So we're talking ascending track, so it's going up to the brain. So in other words, the information is coming from receptors. Coming from the receptors, traveling through the gray matter, and then out to the white matter to the proper track. And that's part of the processing that the gray matter will do. Then the information will go to the proper track and then up the proper channels. And you can see all this, but just to highlight it, there are 3 orders of neurons, and this doesn't refer to what type of neuron they are, unipolar, bipolar, that kind of stuff. Just the pathway. So wherever the stimulus is, as it travels to the spinal cord, that's a first order neuron, that section of the pathway. So if you think about traveling from Nevada to Kansas City. You could call Nevada to Harrisonville as the first order, Harrisonville to Belton the second order, and then on into Kansas City could be the third order, if you want to think about it as far as a pathway. In other words, it's just a section of the pathway. It's not a reference to a type of neuron. The second order neuron then takes the message and travels it up to the thalamus. And I've got a picture, the far picture over there where the thalamus is at the end of the brain stem. And then from then, goes with the third order neurons out to the proper area of the brain, the cerebral cortex. And that is going to be dependent on what kind of signal it is. Is it visual, auditory, wherever it just needs to go to, whatever section of the brain. But that's first order from the point of the stimulus up to the spinal cord, second order up to the thalamus, and third order out to the particular spot of the brain that it needs to go to. All right, so we're looking at ascending tracts, and here's some names here, and you can see that of the three that are listed there, two of them have, they're essentially two-word names. The third one does not, but it's got a different suffix type thing, and that's what it's a reference to. But when you think Gracialis, you want to think deep, okay, as in deep in the body, the organs, the cavities, that kind of area, or you want to think low, okay, lower limbs, lower trunk, the bottom half of the body for Gracialis. When you're thinking, and then just remember that the proprioception that you see there, and you got the definition there, but we've seen that. We were looking at reflexes. We saw proprioceptors, and they're simply just a kind of motion sensors. As you move in your limbs, in your legs, there are proprioceptors, and they're just what word am I trying to say? Not simply, but anyway, they're just essentially, there you go, there's the word, motion sensors. They give information, pass information along about the movement, motion, so the brain can always be analyzing and make the adjustments. And when we mean adjustments, it could be for balance, maybe the position of your arms, head, whatever it might be, to help with that. Now, Cunicate is very, very similar to Gracialis, carries a lot of the same stuff, so that'll be easy to remember. And when we're looking at the where am I at? Spinal thalamic. Okay, you want to think T's and P's. Okay, we got temperature and touch. Okay, so if your temperature starts to change, then that information is going to travel the spinal thalamic tract up to the brain, and then travel back down that same track. No, it'd be a different track. I'm sorry, because it'd be descending at that point. I misspoke there. And then, of course, that's going to, if it's temperature, that's going to go to the hypothalamus, and then whatever endocrine system process has got to go to help change that, to get that homeostasis back intact. So you want to think T's, temperature and touch. You also want to think pain and pressure. So if you're, say, I don't know, just one of your organs, you got a pain in your leg, that's going to travel up the spinal thalamic tract to the brain, and then back down the descending tracts. A couple other ascending tracts. Let's see, we're on 4, the spinal reticular. No, we're on. Yeah. Lost my movement there. The spinal reticular, again, pain from tissue injury. Now, when you think about, we talked about movement, and you can see a reference to the cerebellum getting feedback. Think about movement. Okay, think about when you're walking. We had a little bit of this when we were talking reflexes. Just all the things the body does to counterbalance not just the origin muscles in movement, but the antagonist muscles to keep you balanced. Because theoretically, if you're moving forward and the body doesn't do anything with the opposite muscles, man, you could just fall face first. So if you're walking forward, your head has to be in such a right way. And if you're trying to hold it up, it's got to have an antagonistic muscle to kind of help with that balance. So it's not just the leg muscles to move yourself forward, your foot, but it's just a lot going on. And think about the really complex motions. So think about a wide receiver that's going down the field. They are running, they are sprinting down the field, and we'll just make it as easy as possible. We'll say a straight line. Okay, they are running down the field in a straight line, but they are looking back for the ball. Okay, they're looking back for the ball, and then, okay, so there's that whole set of balance right there. You got your head turned, so now you got to keep it upright. So even though it's turned, which normally brings your chin down, you got to pull it back. You've got to have that balance with the entire body. And then the raising of the hands to try to catch, and then to catch the ball while you're sprinting. Okay, head back. Okay, then there's the fine motor controls of the fingers, because you just can't stiff hand it. We all know what happens then. The ball just bounces off. But you gotta have that catching position, and then you gotta have that give. Man, that is a lot going on. And the same thing with an outfielder. Somebody's hit a ball pretty deep, and they are sprinting towards the wall, and they're looking over their shoulder, got the glove up. I mean, it's just an unbelievable amount of messages that have to be sent. Sensory receptors, the pyroreceptors, the motion, just to make sure all of that happens in a successful manner. So in reality, when you're watching, hopefully it's the Chiefs, but when you're watching a football game and a receiver drops a ball on a long pass, that's disappointing. And you're thinking, man, you got to catch that ball. But man, just stop and think, as I've tried to highlight here, all of the things that have to happen just not to fall over. So yeah, it's a pretty complex system. All right, so let's look at some descending tracts. And again, I mentioned in the introduction that these are a little easier to spot. There's no names on this slide or screen, but it is on the next one. These are a little easier to spot because they're suffixes. They're typically one word names, and the suffixes are all the same, so they're a little easier to spot. And let's see. But descending tracts, these are the tracts that are going to be bringing the solution. The brain has processed the information, and now we're sending out what needs to be done. So we're going down the spinal cord, obviously, and looking like if you were looking at the diagram beside me here, somewhat beside me, we're going to be on that right-hand side. What you would consider right-hand side as you're looking at it. It'd be flipped, actually, because you're looking at something the opposite direction, just like you're looking yourself in the mirror. Your right is actually the left in the mirror. But anyway, two neurons are involved in this process, and they synapse, as it says there, in the anterior horn. I include this diagram just to remind you where the anterior horn is. Remember looking at the cross section of the spinal cord like you're looking down onto the vertebrae. The anterior horn is on the bottom, but as it sets upright normally, as it normally would, anterior refers to front, posterior back. So the anterior, that would be the front, it'd be what would be facing your front, your face side of your body, and of course the posterior is the top of this, or what would be the back of the spinal cord if it was upright like it normally is. But those two, the upper neuron, the lower neuron, the upper neuron is what's in the brain and the brain stem, and the lower neuron is what's in the actual spinal cord, and they come together, they synapse, as it says there, in that anterior horn. In other words, they're coming back into the gray matter at that point in time. All right, and here's some of the descending tracts. When we're talking corticospinal, we want to think precise, fine motor movements. So like handwriting. So if you were drawing something, okay, if you were a SWAT team member and you're trying to defuse a bomb and you're cutting the red cord or the blue cord, whichever it is, it always seems to be different in movies. So that's the corticospinal tract, the tectospinal tract. That's reference to your head, movement side to side, up or down. So if when my wife says, "Hey, do you want to go get some tacos, or you want to eat tacos tonight?" and I nod my head yes, that message came down the tectospinal tract. In other words, say yes to that. Or pizza, if she says pizza, make some pizza night. The reticulospinal tract, what do I got down here for that? That is, limbs, legs, arms. You got to move your arm or leg. That message is going to come down the reticulospinal tract. So again, lots of information here. You just want to be sure to capture it all, but just highlighting the main points. All right, so our last screen here, the vestibulospinal tract. That's about balance. Okay, it's about balance, whether it's the ear or just limbs. Like I mentioned earlier, you're walking, you're running. Maybe your arms need to be positioned in a certain way, your head positioned in a certain way, getting your shoulders back. And then I included a diagram here as well that highlights more specifically where each of these are. So I'm not going to go through this, but simply you'd want to pause the video, take a picture, take a screenshot, whatever, but somehow collect this information, whether you draw it and label it, whether you just get you a picture of it in some manner, but just recognize where they are for each of those tracts. So that's our video over tracts of the spinal cord. When we come back together next time, we're going to be talking about the nerves and the ganglion. We'll see you then.